Thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
No
So,
problem.
yes. Well, thank you for the birthday, Tabitha. I appreciate that. So, and it's funny that you mentioned like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm actually reading or rereading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Aha.
And it takes like 5 seconds to read, but yeah, I was like, it's still funny. It holds up. It's unbelievable. So, um, once again, welcome everybody. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today on this warm spring Wednesday, not Tuesday, for our latest in our New Mexico recovery series. Today we have top 10 grant seeking tips, and we are joined today by my wonderful friend Tonia Brown over at the Grant Plant. We're just letting folks in. As we are letting folks into the Zoom room, please introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, your organization, and anything you're hoping to get from the conversation today. What are your takeaways for today? And if you have never been to one of these before, this is a series that has been sponsored in partnership with the Grant Plant and with the Kellogg Foundation. We've been hosting this since September. And you can find these videos. I know Tonia will go over this with her slides in just a second, but you can find this series on YouTube. Just look up on YouTube Pivotal New Mexico, and you'll find this series specifically. It's open to the public, and these are all free. And a little bit about Pivotal New Mexico. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We were actually founded by the Grant Plant about 6 years ago by the sisters, Tara and Aaron, over at the Grant Plant. And we are just growing by leaps and bounds and offering all kinds of stuff. So if you want to find out more, you can always email me. I'll leave my contact in the chat, and you can visit www.pivotalnm.org for more information on our organization. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Tonia Brown.
Hello, everybody. I just snuck in the YouTube Pivotal channel link in the chat, so you can go ahead and bookmark it now and have that as a really great resource. So I think we're on the 11th or 12th training in this series. And so there's a lot of resources. I'll actually probably be referring to a couple of them during the course of this. Like under this tip, if you want to really deep dive in it, go watch this video. So thank you all very much for welcoming me once more. Let me share screen. This is the last of the New Mexico #NewMexicoRecovers trainings that I am personally doing, but it is a fantastic series. There we go. All right, slideshow. All right, can y'all see that, hopefully? Okay, so the Grant Plant put together this training session. It's called the 10 Grant Survival Tips, right? These are tips for planning and writing successful grant proposals. It says at the bottom in the arts and culture field, but really that's because that's the last time that we presented, but really in all of the fields. And we'll get to that in a moment, you'll see. So I just want to give you a little bit of information about the Grant Plant to begin with. We are a grants consultancy firm that is based in New Mexico, and most of our clients are from New Mexico, but we do have national clients as well. We were founded in 2003, so we just turned, 19 years old. We have a 13, soon to be 14-person team, and yesterday we were doing a little bit of calculation just for fun, and between the 13 of us that are there, we have 150 years of grant writing experience. So we are old and wise. We still make mistakes and we still learn from them, but hopefully what we'll do today is we will share with you some of that knowledge and sort of distill down into 10 tips, the things, what not to do, what to make sure you are doing. Last year, we did more than 300 grant proposals, grant reports, or other resource development projects. And we just, on March 4th, surpassed $200 million that has been secured by the Grant Plant since its inception. So we're very, very excited and proud. Lots of intelligent, insanely intelligent women. It's an all-woman team over there. So just wanted to give a little shout out to the Grant Plant and sort of give you an idea of where these tips are coming from. As I mentioned, or as Robert mentioned earlier, my name is Tonia Brown, and I am a Resource Development Officer. My contact information will be on the last slide, and you're also welcome to send me a request on LinkedIn. This is just a little bit of the experience that the Grant Plant, or TGP, has had in terms of making successful proposals to the following foundations and funding opportunities. And like I said, this is like a smidgen of some of the grants that we've put out there, but probably the ones that we've done fairly repeatedly. And so now we're going to hop into the top 10 tips. What do you need to survive in the grants world, and how can it make your life a lot easier? So the first thing that we would recommend, and this is really it's not, these aren't necessarily listed in order of priority, but I will tell you this is definitely one of the top ones, and that is to assess the alignment of the grant itself to your needs, your program's needs, your organization or the entity, agency, whatever you're representing, and making sure that it actually aligns with the work or the services that you're looking to provide. So in terms of evaluating alignment, we at the Grant Plant use with our clients a three-pronged question approach, which is, can they, meaning can the funder actually fund you? Are you within their eligibility requirements? Because if you don't meet their bare essential eligibility requirements, they just simply can't and won't in most instances actually fund you. Should they is, well, based on what you know about that funder or funding opportunity, does the type of work that you do in general align with the type of work that they're looking to fund? And is your organization, agency, department, nation, and etc., are you credible enough to elicit possible funds from another entity? And finally, would they? Do they have enough affinity towards your organization and or confidence in your organization based on your track record that you can actually execute what it is that you're saying you're going to execute? So it's really important for you to make sure that your mission and the request for proposals or the funding opportunity announcement are aligned. And if you're not sure, call the program officer. Even federal funding opportunities have program officers that can really kind of guide you through, because sometimes you'll think, well, I mean, they don't exactly say what we do, but we think it's kind of close. And at times, program officers and foundations or funding, those that are submitting funding opportunities out there to the wild, are absolutely interested in something that's a little bit actually off the beaten path, or maybe not what they entirely expected, but still meets the funding priorities and the goals and objectives of that funding opportunity. And at other times, they're going to say, that's really great. We're really pleased to hear you're doing that work. But to be honest, it really doesn't fall within what we are looking to fund. And so having those conversations and doing some initial evaluation and assessment as to whether or not this really is the right funding opportunity for you is really quite vital, because there's nothing worse than starting a grant application and getting into it and doing hours of work and either suddenly finding out, oh my goodness, we're not even eligible for this grant. We didn't read that part closely. Or the more you get into some of the questions and the requests for data, you think, you know what, maybe we just aren't doing what it is they were hoping for us to be doing. I will tell you that there is an entire hour-long training that is on Pivotal's YouTube channel that we referred to earlier. It's called Weighing Options, and it really takes you through a lot more details in terms of the can they, should they, and would they steps. I highly recommend you take a look at that training. Additionally, it's really important to make sure that the terms of the grant that they're offering, when that grant will be offered, for example, the times, it's not available till next year, or we expect you to start tomorrow. Are you shovel ready, for example? And the amounts are really going to make it worth it for you. Sometimes we have clients that come to us and they're looking at a very complicated grant proposal that would take a lot of man hours to put into it. And then once you do that, you realize it's only like a $5,000 grant, which you may really be a lot of money, but you have to sort of weigh how much of an investment are we going to make in terms of writing this grant and putting it together and submitting it versus what's the reward. So it's sort of a return on an investment calculation that you need to do. Sometimes it still is worth it for you because you want to get your foot in the door with a certain funder, or it's like, this is a really vital project and we really just need to get it going. So we're going to do what it takes to make it happen. But there are some things that you really need to sort of consider in terms of whether or not it's going to be the right alignment for your agency or organization. The next tip is to figure out your direction. There's a cute little picture of this compass here, which is actually much more relevant than you might realize when you're thinking about grants, right? So you want to sort of think about, just like I sort of discussed in terms of weighing how much time is going to be put in it versus whether or not it's worth it. What exactly is going to be required with this grant application? So you need to make sure before you even begin and before you make that decision that you are going to invest that time and investment of resources, what exactly does that proposal package and process include? Sometimes they're going to ask for a ton of steps, a ton of information, etc. And you may have all that readily available, or you may realize, man, we don't have any of that available. I don't know that we can get it in time for the deadline. Maybe we'll think about applying it the next round or deadline, excuse me. So you need to ask questions like, what are the steps for applicants? Sometimes applicants are required to attend a pre-workshop meeting or send in a letter of intent. So you need to make sure you're following all the steps appropriately to pursue that opportunity. Other times it's what guidance is available. Usually there's a website or at least a PDF that will have information about the notice of funding opportunity or request for proposals. And then sometimes, as I mentioned, there's maybe it's not required, but there is a helpful technical assistance workshop that's available. So look into that. Also look into some foundations and funders are more than happy to walk you through and actually review your application, not the day before and not even the week before, but if you've got plenty of time leading up to it, sometimes they'll take a look at your application and give you feedback on ways to make it stronger or ways to say, here's where I'm not sure you quite align. And if you do, we'd like to hear more about it in those sections. You also want to consider, how is the proposal submitted? While 95 to 99% of the proposals that we do at the Grant Plant are all available with online portals, sometimes you have applications that must be submitted in person. And so you need to take that in consideration in terms of whether or not you can get it there on time to whatever office it needs to be delivered at. Also, even if it is online, everybody's portal is different. And if you are thinking about doing a federal application, you definitely need to make sure that you have all the appropriate registries in order to even apply for a federal grant. And if you want more information about that YouTube video, I think it was called Alphabet Soup, and it's the acronyms and federal registries that are required to pursue federal grants, is also in that hashtag New Mexico Recovers series. So I highly recommend that one. If you're kind of thinking about getting into federal grants or you're excited about a possible federal grant coming up, you need to start thinking now about the processes to even be eligible to use that portal and apply. You want to think about what components are required. So almost every grant application or grant proposal process is going to require some sort of narrative. That's it's an obvious thing, right? But sometimes the narratives are super simple. Give us 3 pages or give us 5 pages, or maybe if it's a big project, give us 10 pages on what it is. Sometimes it's, we need you to answer these very specific questions. And so it's not a free for all self-driving narrative, but they want to make sure you're hitting on all of their points. And sometimes it's that you need to include financial data. Sometimes you have to pull demographic data. Sometimes you have to pull service data. So it's really important to know before you make this decision, are we going to pursue this? What exactly is involved and what do I need to pull? What data and information and attachments and documents do I need to pull in order to make this a complete package, and then B, actually be a competitive package? And then finally, can we get from here to there on time? Now, the tip that I'm going to tell you is, when you estimate how long it should take you to sort of put these things together and then write it all up and then go through a review process, hopefully you have an internal review process, even if it's just, hey, coworker, or hey, boss, can you look at this real quick and make sure everything seems like it's cohesive? You want to add 25 to 50% on top of your time estimate. So if you assume it's going to take me 10 hours to get through this, it's pretty easy application, should be no problem, then you really need to be assuming that you're more like 12 and a half to 15 hours, okay? It's so easy, no matter how well experienced you are in this field, and we do it all the time with projects, to go, yeah, this project should only take such and such hours, and then be deep into the application and go, yep, it's gonna take a little bit longer because something popped up, or this question had something I didn't think about, or I need to pull the data, or I'm struggling with how to actually word this in a way that helps the funder understand that we are well aligned with their funding priorities. So just a little tip from us. So tip number 3, get organized and stay organized. So listen, guys, it's really, really easy to do the first part, right? You start off well, you've got all these tools that are on the table right here. You think, okay, I've got my work plan, I've got an outline, I have a little list of all the things that I need, I am ready, I know who's going to be getting me what data, I am organized, and then you get into the grants. And amidst that, and probably the chaos, which is your everyday life, both outside of work as well as inside work, things become very muddled, and then you're close to the deadline, and so you're hurrying through, and then suddenly all of those things that you did to be organized kind of go out the window. Listen, it happens to the best of us. It happens to us all the time, right? But the more you can kind of refocus yourself and say, okay, I need to stay organized. I need to check my checklists. I need to check my work plan. I need to check my outline and my project map to make sure that I've touched everything that I had planned to at the outset of this, or decide, nope, this is no longer relevant. You want to figure out a way to keep track of it all. So we have 3 tools that we use at the Grant Plan, and 2 of the 3 we are going to give to you today. Robert has either put them in the chat, or he will be emailing them to you directly after this presentation, or both. The third one, I'll explain why we kind of can't send it to you, because it's very variable with each one of the ones, but I'll show you an example. So the first thing is project mapping, and this is one of the attachments that you're going to be getting. It's just basically a 1-page, I think I sent it in both Word as well as a PDF, so that you can kind of type into it. And it's really a way for you at the beginning of your grant to think about sort of all of the 5 W's and the H, right? The why, who, what, where, when, and how much. And you really need to sort of think about how you're going to answer all of these questions. And if you use this project map at the outset of your project, you are much likely to immediately identify where the gaps in your information, right? Like maybe you don't know, or maybe decisions have to get made in order to give those answers. But while you're answering these various questions that are in the project map, it's going to be a really fruitful way for you to think about your project in a comprehensive and cohesive way, and then also probably answer most of the questions that the average funder is going to ask of you. So we're not necessarily going to go through that whole project map. I believe that we did, again, one of the previous trainings, either in the writing a compelling narrative or creating a case statement. I believe it was in there. Those 2 were back in January and February, but also posted on the channel. So that should be one of the tools you'll be getting today. And then this one, I hope that you can all see it. You don't necessarily need to read all of the various little small text, but it gives you kind of an idea of how this might end up getting filled out or populated. And this is what we call our work plan. This particular one is done for a sample federal grant. And so you'll see, like on line 19 right here, we need the application for federal assistance, which is sometimes called the SF 424 for most federal grants. Don't panic if you don't do federal grants, but just giving you a sense of it, right? And so here we have, okay, so what is the component that we need to do that the funder is expecting to get back? What are the descriptions or specific guidelines that were given either on the website, in the portal, or in the PDF with a request for proposals? Who is responsible? And sometimes this column is all your name and nobody else's. But sometimes you're working on a team, or you know you need to get a specific piece of data or worksheet or document from somebody else, and so you'll put it in there. And then we use a coding system, red, yellow, green. So red is it hasn't even been started, nothing's happening yet, you need to do something about it right away. The yellow is it's in progress, we're making some headway on it. And then if it has been finished, or if it's just not relevant or applicable to us, we put it in green. We also put if there are page limits, because this is easy to forget, but also important to note, because if you can't follow instructions, funders are not necessarily going to want to fund you. And then we'll put this last column here, which is other notes. And that's really more our own internal notes, either about something in particular we want to make sure that we include in that, whether it's this particular question I'm really stuck on, I need to get some information about how we want to handle that answer from such and such person. Sometimes it'll just be like, yeah, this doesn't really apply to us, and this is how we need to articulate that in the grant. And so we just put sort of all the notes of things that we want to make sure that we're mindful of as we are creating and then finalizing and quality controlling our documents to make sure we have followed everything that we had sort of set out to do. So this Excel spreadsheet is also going to be sent to you, or is in the chat already, to use as a tool for you. You're free to use it however you want. There is a second tab. I don't know if I have a picture of it now. There's a second tab on this Excel spreadsheet that says criteria. And that's where we recommend that if a funder tells you how they're going to judge things, like we'll give you 10 points in this section and 20 points in this section and 5 points if you can, submit organizational chart or whatever. We highly recommend that you put the criteria in with the work plan, because it's a really easy way to sort of toggle back and forth between the tabs as you're doing the work plan to also go, ooh, you know what? that section's worth 30% of the grant evaluation scoring. So maybe we need to put that in the other notes category, or maybe we need to double check our work as we're, doing the final reviews and the quality control process to make sure, did we really put enough content and did we put enough substantive answers in there that we think we're going to get the full 30 points, and have we met all their evaluation criteria? So I highly recommend that you do that as well. It's a little bonus extra tip for you. The third tool that I talked about, and this one we kind of can't send you because it's really different for every single grant, but we highly recommend, before you even get started writing, setting up a Word template or other template if applicable. Sometimes there's an Excel spreadsheet template where you can put in the components, like the subsections or the headers, or maybe the questions that they're asking you. And so we do that usually, as you can see, like there's subsection B, and then there's communities and entities involved. And then in blue, there's like a little bit of an explanation as to what they're looking for. So then when we go to type in it, we actually begin writing it, we see that instruction, which again is usually cut and paste directly from either the portal, the PDF, or from their website. And we're reminded of that as soon as we start working on it. This is stylistic. You could keep that in there till the very end, just to make sure that you're hitting every one of those. What I personally do when I'm doing it is, as I'm writing the narrative in each section, every time I specifically address a point or a thing that they ask for, I highlight it in yellow until that entire paragraph is highlighted in yellow, and I go, okay, check, check, check. I've answered everything that they're looking for in that section. And then, aside from making sure that I'm telling a cohesive and coherent story and narrative, I have done everything I need to do to answer that question and give them the information. Also, if they tell you this specific section will be 5 points or 10 points or whatever, I would recommend you put that in there too. So I can't really give you a tool for this, I'm sorry, but it is a service that we offer if you're looking for it at the grant plant, where if you're really overwhelmed by, say, a federal proposal, and we've done this a number of times for clients, and you go, oh, I don't even know where to start, it's so overwhelming. The grant plant, for example, offers the service of, we can set you up for success. We can get all those templates ready. We can get a work plan ready for you, and then we hand it off to you, and then you go. But honestly, this is one of my funnest things to do, is create the templates. I don't know, I'm weird like that. So tip number 4, we've got a grizzly bear. It's big, it's scary. You need to identify the dangers, right? And I don't mean physical dangers, but I mean, like, how are you going to get yourself in trouble on this project? Because it happens. What are the red flags that maybe you don't want to see because you really need the funding, or you really feel like, man, this is just like, it's so perfect, but they're challenges that you really need to consider and decide, is this worth it? Or it is worth it. No matter what we're going for it, we just need to be aware to not fall into that hole when we get there. So here are our strategies for heading off that danger and making sure you don't end up day before or day of the grant due going, oh my goodness, I don't even know how to handle this, right? So like I said at the outset, check and address eligibility concerns early. Read the eligibility section very, very, very carefully. And if there's any doubt in your mind that you are eligible, make sure to contact the program officer or whoever's in charge and ask that question. One of the biggest places that we see organizations get into trouble with this is when they're using a fiscal sponsor or a fiduciary, and a funder does not allow an organization to apply with a fiduciary or a fiscal agent. Nothing wrong with it, just sometimes certain funders, for whatever reason, will not entertain that. We're finding it actually is happening more and more that they will, but that has been one of the biggest places where the client's not eligible because they're not, even though if they're a 501c3, they actually have their own letter of determination, but they work through a fiscal agent. Sometimes they'll find that they're not eligible. It's also really important to identify areas and items that need prioritization. For example, if you know you have something that needs a signature from somebody who's really hard to get a hold of, or maybe not so reliable about getting things back to you, or maybe it's like 16 different signatures you need on something, which is something we just did for a grant application, you need to start right away, right? Start asking for those things that you think are going to take longer or could be possible hiccups, or frankly, if you have to rely on anybody else but yourself for it, right? You need to think about, how are we going to get that done and ready and eligible. You even need to think about what happens if something happens to me, right? In today's day and age, there are so many things happening where if you get sick or some kind of emergency, what's your backup plan? Who's going to submit the grant for you? Who's going to finish it if you're that sick you can't finish it? And they're going to be able to take it across the finish line. So you kind of need to have almost like a succession plan if something happens to you or you're out or something happens with your office and now the office is suddenly shut and you have to work from home, for example. You need to familiarize yourself with everything early. And this is why the project map and the work plan and setting up the template are so vital to do at the outset or beginning of your process, because those things, once you get done with all three of those things, I guarantee you're going to know just about everything backwards and forwards and probably not even have to look up, although you should constantly double check your PDF, but you're just going to know it off the top of your head. Once you get through those things, every single time you're suddenly an expert because you've thought about all of the questions that you need to really think about in terms of flushing out a plan. You have figured out every single attachment, document, component, etc., that you need to have for the grant. And you've even gone through basically what should be your narrative to ensure that you're going to have all the right things. And you should know at that point where the heavy scoring is going to be at, etc. So use those three tools or do those three things, and you're really going to be familiarized with things quite early, which will put you well ahead of the game. But also remember to use those organization tools all the way through. Don't forget them. It's easy. It's easy to be like, no, I'm just going to keep going. I know we're really good on our work plan. Don't. Go back to your work plan and make sure you check it off. Tip number 5, not always an option for you, but it does take a team to do a really, really well written and executed proposal. And even if that means you are doing every single bit of work, you're pulling all the data, you're doing all the writing, you're gathering together all of the documents, you're getting all the signatures you need, you're even the one that's responsible for basically developing the program. And so you get to kind of make all the decisions about what's going to go into there. You still need somebody to review it. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's going to take at least 2 people, okay? So sometimes it takes many more because you do have to rely on other people in your organization, agency, department, tribe, nation, etc., to give answers, or because it is an actual collaborative effort where somebody's doing this section and somebody's doing this section. So think about who you need. And when you do that, consider forming a grant team that is actually going to be one that is well ahead of the game. You need to identify who needs to be involved and let them know early. Sometimes people have to be a part of it because they're a decision maker. You can't submit anything without their decisions. And sometimes they should be part of it because they have the most subject matter expertise, or it's their department, or you're really looking for good investment in all of the people that are on your team, and you want to make sure that it is equitably created. So identify the absolute must-haves as well as those that you really probably should have. You need to communicate regularly and make sure the task ownership is clear. Now listen, this does not mean you have to sit in a weekly meeting necessarily on this every single time. But as long as, say you have the work plan up on a Google sheet, and then people are regularly updating, this is in progress, still waiting for this piece of information. It's out for signature, it's going in for review. If people are actually regularly updating the work plan and you are communicating with them via email or in person or phone, however you're communicating, then you don't necessarily have to have meetings. But sometimes meetings are the best way. You kind of have to gauge and know your culture within your own organizations or agencies to decide what's really going to be best for you guys. And do not be afraid to check in on progress. Nobody wants to sound like a nag, okay? But you also don't want to be left holding a proposal that is only partially finished and it's the day before the day of the grant being due. This is the worst feeling in the world. So don't be afraid to say, hey, just checking in. How are you doing on your section? Is there any information that you need? Is there anything I can do to help facilitate you getting that in by the internal deadline we set for it? Is there anything you're stuck on? Man, I'm really stuck on this one section and I just can't figure out what's the best way to word this in a way that, still affirms our credibility and the strength and capacity of our organization, but also acknowledges like this could be a potential weakness of ours, right? So don't be afraid to check in on others' progress or talk about your own progress, especially when you're on a team, because when you have so many people working together, many heads are better than one, right? It simply is. Now, there can be too many cooks in the kitchen, but I'll sure tell you this. When it comes to grants, for most organizations, grants are not necessarily everybody's favorite thing to do. So usually it's one person who's leading the charge, right? I am very fortunate that I work with 12 other women who all love grants. So if I'm stuck in a section, I can just poke my head into our chat room and say, hey guys, somebody help me with I'm stuck, right? And I don't have to worry about too much input. Sometimes people are afraid of that. And I'll tell you, it's rarely the situation that you have too much input from others. So don't be afraid to check in on progress, but also sort of open the floor for others to give advice and input. I can't tell what tip we're on. My screen is blocking. I think this is number 6, follow directions. So how do we do this? Now, there's a cute little sign in the back that's kind of wonky about self-registration, but essentially what it comes down to is it's incredibly important for you to demonstrate that you can follow directions. We actually talked about this in the training called What Funders Really Want. And I gave that training as a perspective of somebody who's actually worked for foundations, grant making organizations, as well as somebody who's been a grant reviewer. And one of the things that we hear behind the scenes that nobody kind of wants to say out loud, but it's the truth, is if you can't follow instructions in how to submit this grant, how can we trust that you will follow instructions and how to actually execute using our money for that grant, right? So it really comes down to being a credibility thing. It's not the end of the world if you forget to like underline something, right? But it is really important that as much as possible, you're making as few mistakes when it comes to following instructions. So that could be something as simple as making sure you format or even name your document a certain way. It doesn't mean that your content and your responses are actually responding to, if they have a specific question or a subject they want you to talk about, then actually respond to that question or that subject. Don't just go some other direction because you feel it's important information, or you're like, oh, I don't really want to answer that question because we don't have a really good answer there. Do your best to give an answer. And even if it's a weak answer, acknowledge, we know that we need to work in this area and this is what we're doing to work on it. Make sure that you have every single one of your attachments. For some funders, this could yield you are not eligible because you did not submit a full and complete grant. We're just not even going to evaluate or judge your proposal. We're sorry. That's rough. Don't let one missing attachment ruin dozens, if not hundreds of hours of work that you put into something. Look at that review criteria. Make sure you are dotting all your I's and crossing all of your T's. Make sure that you follow length limitations. So if they tell you X number of words or X number of characters, or even don't go beyond a certain number of pages, don't do it. I don't care how important or exciting you think the information is. You really need to stay within the length limitations. Make sure that you properly compile, if instructions are given, the way that you should put all of your attachments and narrative and any other components for the grant proposal package together. Sometimes they'll give you instructions, sometimes they won't. If they don't, just do what feels intuitive. Make sure your file types and file names are done correctly. Sometimes certain portals will not actually even read that an attachment is there if that is not named appropriately. So I would highly recommend you follow those instructions there. Of course, deadlines are just an absolute 100% non-negotiable. I have never, thinking here, I don't think I've ever seen a case in which somebody missed a deadline without like an absolute travesty emergency happening and a foundation or funder accepting it. And even then, sometimes you're still out of luck. And then finally, make sure that you do have all of the signatures that are required and that they're authorized representatives who can sign those things and not just like a squiggle. And we're not going to talk about who actually signed that. Tip number 7, it will take longer than you think. Remember, we talked about this a little bit earlier. So how do you set your own pace? Sometimes within that work plan, the Excel spreadsheet that I talked about and showed you earlier, it's important for you to actually put internal deadlines in there so that you can make sure to manage your time. So as we talked about earlier, make sure you use a work plan to estimate the amounts of effort and who's going to be responsible for what. And if you can actually delegate to others, great, delegate to others. set those interim and internal deadlines, including setting a couple of days, a deadline a couple of days in advance for two reasons. Number one, by that, 2 or 3 days before deadline, you need to have it out to review by somebody in your organization, one of your friends, your spouse, whomever, your partner. They need to read it and be like, okay, this makes sense, or I am totally lost. I have no idea what you're talking about. Here's where you need to fill in some blanks. Map out those basics earlier. Again, remember that's the project map, which will help you sort of manage your time and effort because it'll give you an idea at the outset of things. Okay, I really need to keep in mind this is like a big part of it. Invest time where it is most important. No, I'm laughing because when I started a grant, I love filling out the sections that are like name, address, phone number, what's your mission, what's your website, right? Because you're like, yes, I feel so accomplished. I got these 3 pages done, right? Well, those 3 pages were the easy gimmies. And while it is nice to have that sense of accomplishment, make sure that right away you're investing your time into the tougher stuff and not just the easy stuff or the easy sections, right? Like, oh, this is a breeze. We can cut and paste from this other one. We answered this question the last time. Invest that time where it is most important because it's easy to push the harder stuff off to the end and procrastinate a little bit and then get yourself into a pickle. And then also remember, just like you need to assume that 25 to 50% of what your original time estimate needs to be added on top, also assume that others will need reminding and support and maybe some extra time as well. So try to plan that in as best as you can with your work plan. Tip number 8, describe the forest before describing the trees, right? So the euphemism is you can't see the forest through the trees, right? You can only see what's right there in front of you, which are the day-to-day details of things. And while, especially since many of you may be program coordinators or you're actually executing the program, it's really easy to get into the day-to-day minutia. The first and most important thing is to make sure you're giving them a global picture of why you're even doing it in the first place before you start getting into the day-to-day, this is how we do this program and this is what we do and these are how many people we serve. So make sure you're revealing the information to help them understand kind of from a top-down approach of what you're doing and why. So, sorry, hang on a second. So strategies for heading off confusion. It says danger here, but I think confusion maybe is a better one. Assume that whoever is your reader or grant reviewer is unfamiliar with your work. Even if you work in the same field, don't necessarily assume that they know about your organization. They know specifically about your program or maybe how it is particularly utilized within a community. So I wouldn't necessarily say like you have to be patronizing in the way that you describe things, but make sure that if you were explaining this to your neighbor, they understood what you were talking about. Make sure that the reader will be able to sort of picture your program, right? And just the same reasons that we have the project map where you have the who, what, where, when, why, how much, you need to think like a journalist. So if you are just writing the story to tell somebody else, again, your neighbor, the lady, at your bowling club, whatever, how would you give them the basics about, say, your organization, agency, or department before you rolled into the specifics of your program, service, or other particular initiative that you were looking for funding? Also ensure that your needs link up to your actions. So what you're asking for funding for is actually what you say you're going to be doing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, ask for outsider reviews help. We sometimes, before I worked with 12 other amazing women that can all help me review my things, I called it the mom review. And while it wasn't always my mom, it was somebody like my spouse, like my best friend, like my kids sometimes. Hey, can you take a look at this and see if it makes sense to you? Or even if it's just a section, right? Maybe they don't have the capacity to read the entire grant, especially if it's a longer one. But make sure that you're having somebody look at your work to make sure that you're clear. Because when you've worked this many hours on a project, it's super easy to talk yourself in circles or to think you have something in there because you did at one point and then you took it out and then you forgot you took it out, but you never put it back in this other section. And so you've got this gaping hole of information that you're missing. Outsiders or people who aren't necessarily in your field are going to be really, really helpful in saying, I don't understand. I don't get it. This part doesn't make sense to me. I will tell you, we talked about this in What Funders Really Want training. As a grant reviewer, there's so many organizations that make the mistake of assuming that I know about their specific niche area and jump right into things. And I have to kind of backtrack and do my best to understand what they're doing. And sometimes I'll even do the work of looking up some information to understand what they're talking about. But frankly, that's not our obligation or responsibility as a grant reviewer. And you should not assume that your grant reader or grant reviewer is going to do the same thing for you. So I would recommend that you make sure you are talking to somebody, explaining it thoroughly, and then making sure somebody else has verified that, yes, everything seems like one good narrative that is understandable. Tip number 9, use quality control processes. So is everything there and is everything complete? So you want to double check your format and length, make sure that it is compliant and consistent. Remember those character limits, your word limits, your page limits. Make sure you're using the right point font. Make sure it's using the right font if they dictate the type of fonts, right? Make sure it's in a PDF format if they don't want Word formats. Make sure that it's meeting all of the directions and that you have answered all of the criteria, questions or criteria that's been set up upon which you will be evaluated. Make sure all the required components, which includes your budget, your attachments, things you need signature forms, and any signatures for and any forms that you need are included as well. Make sure that there's accurate links and contact information and that all of your numbers match. And by numbers, we basically mean budget numbers primarily, but sometimes it is also important to ensure that, say, your service statistics are consistent with whatever other sections it might be referenced in, or if you are breaking things down by that in the budget, just make sure that all of your numbers are consistent. Because sometimes as you're making changes, it's really easy to make a change one place and then forget to make it in another place. And then, of course, ensure that online system entries and attachments are appropriately uploaded before you hit submit. All right, last tip before we get into a little bit of Q&A. And if you guys want to share some of your own tips and some of your own battle stories, I'd be happy to hear them. Don't make the reviewers work harder. So remember, what helps a reader who has a huge stack of proposals? Let me explain to you. As a grant reviewer, I'm trying to think, the fewest number of proposals I've ever had to review and evaluate at once was 3. And that was like, yay, only 3. Normally it is 10 to 12. Okay. And you may not realize that, but once I've gotten to like proposal number 7, my eyes start crossing. I start reading the same paragraph several times. I need to get up, take a break, walk around the house, grab a drink, come back to things, right? It is a tough job to be a grant reviewer and to try to make sure everybody's getting your full attention, your full effort, and that you aren't going to just kind of fade off, right? Like get tired and maybe not give it everything you have. So the easier you can make it for the grant reader or reviewer to say, understand where your review criteria is. For example, if you know they're going to give you, if they're going to evaluate you on 5 things, maybe the 5 sections of your narrative are on those 5 things, right? So do little things to make it easier for me as the grant reviewer, grant reader, so look and go, oh, thank goodness. Okay. All right. Now I can evaluate this section. I can evaluate this section. I can evaluate this section. So to create reviewer-friendly proposals, make sure you use plain language. So don't use a bunch of technical jargon and don't feel the need necessarily, unless it's your writing style, to put in like really flowery, wonderful, super hip, trendy words. We don't care about that. We really just care about what it is you're hoping to do or what kind of change you're hoping to affect. Avoid long text blocks. As much as you can prevent a page-long paragraph, I would love you. Okay. If you can break it up into smaller paragraphs, if you can break it up as appropriate and if relevant with graphics, with tables, with charts, with images, again, use those sparingly, but sometimes they really are important to sort of explain what's happening with your organization. So avoid super long text blocks. And even if, I don't know if we have this written in here, but even if they say 1,000-word maximum, you don't have to use all 1,000 words. You don't have to. I know you think it's your only opportunity to like really talk up your organization, But frankly, if you feel like you've gotten your point across, you don't have to fill in everything. You're not going to be marked down. This isn't high school where you haven't met your word limit, right? Make sure you've clearly articulated yourself and then be done. You don't have to get into huge log things. Clearly state how you meet their requirements, or if their requirements don't apply to you. This also means clearly stating how your project, program, services, or mission of organization aligns with their funding priorities. When you're given freedom, structure the proposal based on their guidance. As we mentioned, this is why you would set up one of those templates. And then, you know what, we go back and forth on the idea or thought of the use of acronyms. Clearly, if it's like your organization name, or it's just going to be used like 72 times in your application, then use an acronym, right? And maybe in each new section or something you spell. Limit the use though of acronyms as much as you can, because I have read proposals and I think I counted it was 23 acronyms, and I literally, as the grant reviewer, had to make myself a glossary. Again, more than I had to do, but I was really trying to give them 100% of me and 100% of my attention, which they made me work hard for that. Okay. So, survival themes, your top 10 survival tips to get through the grant seeking field. Number 1, you are lost without good orienteering. And so to orient yourself, what are you going to do? You're going to create a project map, you're going to create a work plan, and you're going to create a narrative template and maybe a budget template. Number 2, you need to pack well and use those tools. So you've created those tools, you filled them in, don't forget to actually use them, right? Why would you bring a compass with you on a trip if you're never going to actually pull it out of your pocket to make sure you're going in the same direction? Even if you think you're going in the right direction, it sure doesn't hurt to check, right? And finally, remember that you as a grant writer, even if that's not your title or your official role, but it is today when you're trying to submit this grant, as a grant writer, you're basically a trail guide, or what I like to call a docent for your organization, right? You're doing your best to give a really great, cool, exciting, fun, the reason why you're passionate about it explanation. So don't be afraid to act like a trail guide or a docent or, a tour guide who is basically inviting people to learn about their organization. So there is my contact information, including the Grant Plant's website at the top. It's the Grant Plant NM for New Mexico.com. My phone number and direct extension is there, and my email is there as well. And as I mentioned, I am also available on LinkedIn. You're welcome. I love linking up people after these trainings. So by all means, feel free to send me a request. That being said, we have about 10 minutes, and I'd like to open it up for questions, comments, etc. I'm going to try to read the chat right now. I know one person said that they were hoping to learn about where to seek grants from, and unfortunately, we really didn't cover that too much, but there's an entire training that I just did, which was called Prospecting for Gold, Where to Find Grants. That's also on the Pivotal YouTube page. Highly recommend you go look at that one as well. So, just looking, want to identify the basics, good. Planning for appropriate travel and traffic, okay. Project map, okay. So I see Robert put up the templates. That's great. Shayna, I'm glad I'm not the only one who likes completing that part, right? Yeah, you feel like, all right, like a third of the way done, but not really. You're like 1/12 of the way done. So, and thank you. Robert just put up there the specific link for the prospecting for grants. And that gives you lots of tips, including free or very economical ways to get access to databases. Herbert, I see you clapping. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. Did you have a question? Okay, please go ahead.
So more times than I care to admit, I get that email that says, thank you so much for submitting your proposal. We were very competitive. However, we wish we could, fund everybody and so on. And I always ask for feedback on that. But my question is really about those foundations that often say we do not accept unsolicited proposals. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to break through to some of those agencies who will only entertain a proposal if you're invited. How do we get through to some of them Is it a coffee? Is it a unsolicited letter of introduction? How do we break through that?
How do you get invited to the prom, right? Okay, so I definitely feel your pain, and I have worked at many organizations over the years where this has been a challenge for us. And this in and of itself could be an entire session, and maybe we talk about doing this, right? Let me give you some tips and some things that I have done. You have to be careful in the way you do this, and you kind of have to like get a feel for how appropriate it would be. Sometimes it's a matter of connecting with somebody on LinkedIn. Sometimes I send our annual report to that foundation unsolicited. Just mail it out to them. Hey, thought you'd take a look, maybe with a cover page or just a little thing. Thought you'd be interested in some of the work we're doing. Just thought I'd pass this on. Or maybe it's your monthly newsletter or something of that sort. Sometimes you attend a workshop that they're putting on or a presentation, right? So they're going to present this big initiative that they're doing. You're not part of it. You're not even eligible for it anytime soon, right? They've already picked their people. It's basically a non-starter in terms of you getting involved with that. But it is a way for you to network and possibly meet some people and have those things sort of introduced. The next is to ask your contacts, your board of directors, your volunteers, your staff. Hey, does anybody know anybody from this foundation? We'd really like to get in there. And then sometimes it is really just a matter of being, I don't want to say forward is the word I'm going to use, but I don't mean it in a negative way. It's like kind of being bold and just saying, hey, we know you don't accept unsolicited proposals, but we feel like the work that we do really aligns with your funding priorities, and wondered if you'd be willing to meet for a half hour on Zoom, or wonder if you'd be willing to come for a tour of our organization. Or we have our annual fundraising breakfast coming up. Not asking you for any funding, but we'd love for you to come because you're going to hear some testimonies about what we're doing in the community from some of our beneficiaries. So think about the ways in which you would network normally to try to make those connections. And I understand there are some foundations, especially the bigger ones, that are hard to break in. But the more you can kind of get your name out there, the more you can, in a not very obnoxious way, like you've got to kind of time and pace it, right? You don't do it all in 1 month, but the more you can kind of get yourself in front of them, the more they might go, you know what, we keep hearing the name of this organization. What are they about? Somebody needs to look up and ask some questions. So that's how I've been able to accomplish it. Not always successfully. I've fallen flat on my face trying to get invites into things, but that is the way that I have broken into organizations, or foundations, I should say, that we did not think we would ever be able to get an invitation from. Nate says, I can't figure out how to copy the links to the templates. Will you email them too? And Robert says, yep, we will be emailing them in the morning. Any other questions, comments, battle stories, tips you want to share that you think are really important?
Can I share something again?
Yeah, please.
Not long ago, I asked a coworker, who shall remain nameless, if they could review my final draft. This person rewrote just about the whole thing. Very, very upsetting. The questions were not answered. Irregular language, incoherent sentences. So what my suggestion is, is to definitely ask a coworker or a stranger to review your work, but be very specific on the kind of feedback that you need. Had I done that and just said, please look for typos,
right?
Look for consistency, but please don't rewrite it. Or if you have a comment, put it in the comment section, because there has been a tendency to, oh, I'm going to say this, I'm going to make this comment, and then I get it back, and I'm 74 characters over the limit, and I got to go back. So be very specific on the kind of feedback that you're asking for.
That's a really great point. And we do that here internally at the grant plant as well. We'll say sometimes we've worked collaboratively with the client on this one. The client is really happy about the language and the way we've answered it. So the review we're asking you for is really one for punctuality, grammar, format, right? Like, did we follow all those things? We don't want you to tear up too much unless you see like a major problem, and then maybe just make a comment, don't actually change anything. So that's a great tip, because I have not had the experience of getting a terrible review back, like terribly performed review. I'm sorry you found yourself in that situation. So All right, any other questions? While we're waiting for other questions to pop up, I do want to plug really quick. We don't have a date for it yet for Pivotal, but they do have one more training in this hashtag New Mexico or NM Recovers series, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, this series is generously, we received a donation, Pivotal received a donation to make this available to you by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. So I am remiss that I did not thank them at the beginning of this. I apologize. But they have one last training, which is going to come up sometime in the month of April. We're still working on scheduling it. That will be on budget mapping and budget narratives and developing budget narratives. That will be sometime in April. So definitely subscribe to Pivotal's page and keep an eye out for that, because I'm going to that one. I don't know about you guys, but that's always a tough area. So Serena says this was very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Serena. And Robert says hashtag budget nerds unite. Yeah, I love working on budgets. I know budgets are hard for some people, but if you're super super anal retentive like me and love numbers and love crunching numbers and making sure it's great. So Joe says thanks. Thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. And with that, unless you have any other questions, we're going to go ahead and conclude this. As I mentioned, I'm going to put my email and phone number once more in the chat. There's my email and my number. And then on LinkedIn, I'm just Tonia Brown. So there we go. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day. Hopefully it is sunny and beautiful where you're at. I know it's sunny and beautiful. I'm out on the East Coast, so it's really nice. So thank you all. All right, take care.